In the spring of 1989, New York City stood at a crossroads, a metropolis emerging from years of rising crime rates, economic turbulence, and heated debates about law and order. Central Park, a symbol of urban escape, had itself been a stage for rising tensions between communities, law enforcement, and the growing demand for safety. In this environment, 5 boys from Harlem were about to have their lives irrevocably altered. PBS +1. VO. Antron McCrae, Kevin Richardson, Yusef Salaam, Raymond Santana, and Corey Wise were Black and Latino teenagers from working-class neighborhoods. At the time, their world was shaped by tight family networks, economic hardships, and the everyday challenges of adolescence in one of America's largest cities. Growing up in Harlem, a neighborhood rich in cultural resilience but also marked by concentrated poverty and limited opportunities, these young men navigated schools, friendships, and ambitions like many of their peers. PBS. None of the 5 had extensive prior contact with the criminal justice system. They were typical teenagers, attending school, visiting local hangouts, and spending time with peer groups after classes and on weekends. Yet, on the evening of April 19, 1989, a series of events in Central Park would thrust them into a national spotlight. PBS. VO. That night, clusters of teenagers, estimated to number around 30, had gathered in Central Park. Some of them engaged in disorderly conduct. Accounts from that evening described scattered confrontations and minor assaults on passers-by as dusk turned to night. History, unbeknownst to most New Yorkers of the time, this scene would soon be linked, however tenuously, to one of the most infamous criminal cases of the late 20th century. Public anxiety about rising crime pervaded the city. Headlines warned of wilding teens and a breakdown of social order. Law enforcement faced intense pressure to respond decisively. In this climate, the fate of 5 boys was about to be determined not only by evidence, but by public sentiment and the loudest narratives of fear and urgency. On the morning of April 20th, 1989, park workers discovered a woman unconscious in a secluded area of Central Park. She was later identified as Tricia Maley, a 28-year-old investment banker. Maley had been violently assaulted and left in a condition that shocked the city. She spent 12 days in a coma, and when she regained consciousness, she could not recall the events of that night. History. VO. As news of the attack spread, New Yorkers were horrified. The assault on a woman jogging alone in a city landmark became a symbol of New York's broader struggles with urban violence and public safety. Police were already investigating a parallel series of physical assaults and disturbances involving groups of teenagers in the park. Within hours, these strands were linked in the public imagination and, soon, in the criminal investigation itself. History. Law enforcement agencies moved quickly. Raymond Santana and Kevin Richardson, both 14 at the time, were picked up by police earlier that night for alleged involvement in disorderly conduct. They were held for questioning as the assault investigation intensified. Later, Antron McCrae, Yusef Salaam, and Corey Wise were brought in for questioning based on being identified by other teens in custody. Wikipedia. VO. Interrogations were extensive and exhausting. All 5 teenagers were separated and questioned for many hours, often without access to legal counsel or their parents. Over time, in stressful and high-pressure settings, each of the boys provided statements implying some involvement in the attack. These statements, recorded on video, will become critical evidence for prosecutors. PBS. Yet from the start, serious questions surrounded the process. There were no eyewitnesses that placed any of the 5 at the scene of Maley's assault. DNA collected from the crime scene did not match any of the teens, and no physical evidence tied them directly to her attack. In the context of these investigative gaps, confessions obtained during police interrogation became the linchpin of the prosecution's case. Wikipedia. VO. In newsrooms across New York City, headlines framed the story in stark terms: a violent assault, a wolf pack of youths, and an urgent demand for justice. Sensational reporting amplified public fear and contributed to a climate in which the accused were seen as guilty long before entering a courtroom. By late 1989 and into 1990, prosecutors charged the 5 youths in connection with Tricia Maley's assault. 2 trials unfolded, In the first, McCrae, Salam, and Santana were tried together. In the second, Richardson and Wise faced charges separately. History. Despite the absence of corroborating physical evidence, the taped statements were presented in court as voluntary confessions. Some details in those statements were inconsistent with each other and with known facts about the crime scene. Still, the jury convicted all 5 on charges ranging from rape and assault to robbery and riot, charges that carried lengthy sentences even in juvenile court. History. VO. Sentencing reflected the seriousness with which the courts treated the offense. Antron McCrae, Yusef Salam, Raymond Santana, and Kevin Richardson received sentences that led to 6 to 10 years of incarceration. Corey Wise, because he was tried as an adult, faced a significantly longer sentence, eventually spending more than a decade in prison. History. As the trials concluded, public opinion largely supported the convictions. New Yorkers were fatigued by crime statistics and anxious about safety. Tough sentences were widely seen as necessary. The media narrative of dangerous, wilding teens reinforced underlying racial and social anxieties, further entrenching belief in guilt among much of the city's population. In the years that followed, the convicted men served their sentences and eventually returned to society, carrying the lifelong consequences of their convictions. But the case was far from closed. Over the 1990s, advances in DNA analysis and further investigation opened a new chapter in the story. PBS. In 2001, Matias Reyes, a convicted serial rapist and murderer already serving a life sentence, made a confession to fellow inmates and later to authorities that he alone had assaulted Maylee. His account matched key details of the crime, and subsequent DNA testing confirmed that the biological material from the rape kit at the crime scene matched Reyes, and did not match any of the 5 men previously convicted. Wikipedia. On December 19, 2002, after a thorough legal review, a New York State Supreme Court judge vacated the convictions of McCrae, Richardson, Salam, Santana, and Wise, citing the new evidence and the inconclusive link between the earlier confessions and the actual forensic record. The legal conclusion was clear. Their convictions could no longer stand. PBS. The exoneration brought relief, but also profound reflection. For many legal scholars, civil rights advocates, and members of the public, the case became a powerful example of how systemic pressures can distort justice. It raised questions about interrogation tactics with minors, the role of media in shaping public belief, and the willingness of authorities to reevaluate evidence once accepted truths are challenged. In the aftermath of their exoneration, the 5 men, now adults, pursued legal action against the city of New York and the police and prosecutors involved in their arrest and prosecution. In 2003, they filed a civil rights lawsuit seeking damages for malicious prosecution, racial discrimination, and emotional distress. PBS. For more than a decade, the lawsuit wound through legal challenges and negotiations. The city initially resisted a settlement, but in 2014, under then-Mayor Bill de Blasio's administration, New York City agreed to a $41 million settlement with the 5 men. The settlement equated roughly to about $1 million for each year the individual spent incarcerated, a recognition of profound harm done, though not an erasure of those years lost behind bars. History. VO. Even with exoneration and a civil settlement, the case remains a subject of debate. Some commentators argue that elements of the original investigation, including the broader context of violent activity in the park that night, were underexamined. Others assert that the wrongful convictions underscore deep flaws in how prosecutors and police respond under pressure, especially toward youths of color. The Central Park 5 case left an enduring legacy in law, media, and public consciousness. Law enforcement and legal professionals have revisited interrogation protocols, especially regarding juveniles. Civil rights advocates continue to call for reforms to prevent coerced confessions and to ensure that all defendants, regardless of race or background, receive fair treatment under the law. Factual America Podcast. VO. Media scholars have also reflected on how news coverage shapes public opinion and potentially influences legal outcomes. Sensational language, politically charged headlines, and narratives constructed before trial raise important ethical questions about reporting on criminal investigations. Factual America Podcast. For 5 men whose lives were upended, The case remains a testimony to resilience and a reminder of the human cost when justice fails. Their stories and the broader societal conversation they continue to fuel challenge viewers and citizens to think critically about evidence, fairness, and the very purpose of the criminal justice system.